Yeah, this planet's empty. I see no signs of life. Please don't tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call.
Hey everybody, welcome once again to Raging Chickens Out to Coop Live. Yes, it is our call-in show for August 10th, 2020, all. Here we have a space to talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sort, right? From our own backyards and, hey, from across the country. Our live show is the latest addition to our weekly Friday show in which Sean Kitchen and I break down the good, bad, and ugly in state and national politics. But you can get both by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also, check out our YouTube page. Like us on our YouTube page. And if you want to help out the show right from the get-go, comment, like, subscribe. That helps us all out. But you can only join this live conversation, the Monday night conversation, at 7 p.m. on Monday nights through the Podbean app. Here you can call in, you can ask questions, you can add your voice to the discussion. You can also support this show becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress. Or you can show us some love during our live show by sending us a little gift through the Podbean app. Yeah, right at the bottom of that little app there, right? There's this little gift icon right at the bottom of the screen. You could send us a virtual cup of coffee or a love balloon or some roses or even a gold mic, right? They can buy these little golden beans and you give us these little gifts. And just those little gifts during the live show too as well can help support and expand this podcast and the work of progressive homegrown media. Yep. And tonight's show, if you get, you're ready for more, or ready to check out more, after our show, I want you to head on over to the Rick Smith Show live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, or Facebook, whatever you can do. And a special shout out, as always, to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. And check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page. That's Jonathan Mann with 2 N's. Or follow him on Twitter at SongADayMan with 2 N's. That's SongADayMan, 2 N's. He's the guy who holds the Guinness Book of World Records for the most songs written in consecutive days. He's been doing it for some crazy amount, and every single day. I tell you, his work has actually helped me get through this freaking crazy pandemic that we're all living in. So here. But my guest tonight, right, is public school teacher and activist Steven Singer. Steven is an 8th grade language arts teacher in Western Pennsylvania, nationally board certified teacher, and has an MAT from the University of Pittsburgh. He's the director of the research and blogging committee for the Badass Teachers Association. And if you don't know the Badass Teachers Association, it's time for you to get acquainted because those folks freaking rock. He's also the co-founder of the Pennsylvania-based education budget and advocacy group, T.E.A.C.H. That's Tell Everyone All Cuts Hurt. He ran a successful campaign through MoveOn.org against the since repealed voter ID law in the Keystone State. And his writing on education and civil rights issues has appeared in the Washington Post, Education Week, and the LA Progressive, CommonDreams.org, Portside Navigator, and even Diane Ravitch has had him over on her education blog. So he blogs regularly at gadflyonthewallblog.wordpress.com. That's gadflyonthewallblog.wordpress.com. And he's also the author of Gadfly on the Wall, A Public School Teacher Speaks Out Against Racism and Reform. Steven, I'm so freaking psyched that you are kind of joining us tonight, especially as the beginning of the school year looms. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I think, Steven, it's been a while since we talked, actually. Steven, for those folks who've been following Raging Chicken over the years, know that we would kind of push out Steven's work, and I would still share his work for a while. And then in this past kind of year and a half, especially of kind of this reorganization that we've been working on with Raging Chicken, so I haven't been kind of doing as much with the actual blog and really focusing more on the podcast. So when I was thinking about, God, here we go back to school, who is it that we need to have back and get back in touch with? And Steven was at the top of my list. And it seems appropriate, Steven, that that you're here tonight at the night that my local school board, that's the Penn Ridge School District in Upper Bucks County, is voting on the administration's back to school pandemic plan, Right now, there's the discussion is going on while we're on the show, right? And it seems appropriate, doubly appropriate, that we're sitting here after there's a new report from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Children's Hospital Association. This new report just released say that at least 97,000 children have tested positive for the coronavirus just in the last 2 weeks of July. So I don't know if that's a good omen or a bad omen, but there you are, Stephen. That's where we're at.
Yeah, it seems like, a lot of us are in that position, with school boards slowly making up their mind about what they're going to do about reopening plans, and, the evidence mounting that, maybe in-person schooling might not be such a great idea this fall.
Yeah, well, you've been on this now. You've been writing about these plans, right? And how much of a bad idea that this kind of going back to school in the pandemic is. I was, following this, you got one from a few days ago or maybe last week, Governor Wolf, you can't shirk your duty to close PA schools during the pandemic, or reopening schools unsafely will not solve anything. Or what I told the McKeesport area school directors about the unsafe reopening plan proposed by administrators. And literally just an hour before we got on tonight, you published parental choice won't save us from unsafe school reopening plans. So I think it's fair to say that this has been on your mind.
Yeah, it's it's one of those. It's definitely like my nightmares,
right,
and, my waking
exactly.
moments.
Exactly. So give us a sense. Yeah. So give us a sense of where you sit in this. Like, how do you see this kind of going forward, and why have you been kind of like so insistent upon kind of sounding the alarm about this back to school stuff?
Well, gosh, there's so many different ways to approach that. I mean, one of them is, I guess for me, I saw somewhere a quote from Eve Ensler about what it means to be an activist. Mm-hmm. And I can't quote it because I didn't remember the exact words, but it was something about how most activists are people who are so incensed about some kind of injustice that they can't help but stand up and try to fight it.
Right.
And for myself personally, even before I became a teacher or anything, the whole issue of children and violence against children has always been it's one of those things that just sticks in me, Yep. It just bothers me so much whenever bad things happen to kids, And I think it's part of the reason why I became a teacher in the first place, because I like helping kids learn. I like helping them, discover, the person they want to be. And this particular issue of the school reopenings just, hits me right to the heart, because I'm a parent as well, and I'm a public school teacher, and I'm used to living in this fact-based world where we look at the science, we look at what's happening, and we try, at least, to make sane, rational decisions based on that. And somehow between March and now, that world has kind of disappeared, or at least parts of it have. You mentioned that American Academy of Pediatrics report. Like you said, 97,000 children have tested positive for COVID-19, and that was just in the last 2 weeks of July.
Right.
So if we put that in context, of the 5 million people in the United States that are being diagnosed with the virus, that's 338,000 children. And that includes the 97,000. So nearly a third of the children who have tested positive were just in the last couple of weeks. So we need to really understand that, whenever this coronavirus thing started, or at least came to this country, we quarantined the kids pretty much from the start. And that's why the numbers have been so low with children. People, we used to think, well, maybe they're not as susceptible and what have you. But now we're seeing they are just as susceptible. We just kept them away from it.
Right.
And as summer schools have opened and some districts are actually starting to open with the regular academic years, kids are really getting affected with this. So I think that's something we really need to pay attention to.
Well, and I think that, there had been this discourse in in particular cable news, but also in newspapers and kind of mainstream reporting where there was, this sense that, well, kids are safe, right? That, kids don't seem to be getting, and really it was like, look, kids are not dying from this, right? It's like we see most of the deaths which were taking place were in nursing homes and other kind of like, what they call it, the something vivial, whatever, living environments. You saw these kind of this kind of rapid peak of deaths, and older people, I should say, or people with pre-existing conditions were the ones that were hit the hardest. And I think that the way that it gets kind of translated in our like pro con on off either or black white world, right? Because that's how so many people think in this freaking country, because of what we could get on this one for a whole other show on standardized testing, right? Which encourages that kind of thinking. but because of that, I think people have generally, let's take best case scenario, right? People who took this seriously, did the social distancing, were wearing masks and things like this, still have not yet felt the full, or kind of wrap their heads around the full impact that this is having on children. And I think by this coming out in the American Academy of Pediatrics stuff, that number has shocked a bunch of people. A matter of fact, is like Ainsley Earhart, like on Fox News, right? Fox and Friends, or whatever the hell that show is, where she was like visibly shocked. I didn't watch the show. I saw a clip of it though, when those numbers came out. And you saw her, right? Even the Fox News fanatics out there kind of grappling with that number of 97,000. She's like, I just can't get my head around that. And I think that, at least the discussions locally here among parents and, thinking about going back to school, said, well, trying to make these weird decisions as parents who, we're not qualified to make the freaking decision about, the medical safeness or about going these back to school plans. But, we're at this point where it's like, well, at least we know that kids aren't going to be harmed as much. And now with this report, it seems to throw everything into crisis just as we're about to reopen again.
Definitely. I mean, I'm kind of glad that this report seems to have struck a nerve. I mean, I've been seeing, I'll see a report, this school opens up and has all these cases and this outbreak. And you've had these outbreaks in Israel, when Israel started opening up schools, and they'd make a little bit of a wave, but this report does seem to be stopping people to some degree, but there's just this momentum. I don't understand it really, this blind kind of rushing forward to open the schools, because it doesn't seem like anybody wants to or has the guts to stand up and make the decision and say, the buck stops here. I'm telling you, we can't do this. And if you want to blame someone, blame me. Yep. And I mean, I like Governor Wolf. I do. I mean, I voted for him. I think he's done a lot of good things, but I'm disappointed that at least so far, he hasn't stepped up, because in Pennsylvania, as I'm sure you're aware, we kind of, we rely on him to be the adult.
Yeah,
we do.
We do.
And he just hasn't. I know he got a lot of criticism for what happened in March, unfair criticism. Everyone calling him a tyrant, not everyone, but people calling him a tyrant and all this for, how dare you, not let me go out and die from this pandemic. And I guess it's had some kind of an impact, because, I mean, what's happening, this is a public health issue. Right. This can't be something that each school district decides on its own. This is something that affects all of us. It does not respect school district boundaries. It doesn't respect county borders. This is something that, at very least, we need to look at, from the state perspective.
Well, I think I'm struck by. I want to read to folks just the kind of the beginning of the post that you just put up today, because it resonates so much with my own experience. And this one you have out today, it's called "Parental Choice Won't Save Us from Unsafe School Reopening Plans." And this is how you begin it. You say, "I am the parent of a public school student, and I have a choice. I get to decide whether my daughter will go back to school in person or online. And that's the only thing that should matter to me. At least that's what the superintendent of my home district told me when I went before the school directors last week and asking them to reconsider administration's unsafe reopening plan. At McKeesport Area School District, Dr. Mark Holtzman and the administration proposed unlocking the doors for a half-day in-person classes Monday through Fridays. Kids would be split into two groups, one attending in the mornings and the other in the afternoons. That way, with the buildings at half capacity, there will be enough physical space for social distancing. The remainder of the time, kids should be learning online. However, if you don't approve, you can opt out." So walk me through why that's not a plan. and why that's not going to keep us safe.
The problem with that plan, there are lots of problems with the plan. But I mean, one problem for myself as the parent of a child going to that district, which is, by the way, the district where I went to, almost every member of my family went to. I've lived there my entire life. My roots go back, quite a ways.
So fair to say you're not a stranger.
Not at all. Not at all. There's certain kind of cognitive dissonance walking into your high school.
Yeah.
And into your auditorium to talk to, school board members. But
right.
I mean, on the one hand, what they have in my district, they already had a cyber school program. Most districts have their own cyber school program for kids that are having difficulty with the regular school for whatever reason.
Right.
And that's the option that I have. I can enroll my daughter in that cyber school program that's existed for years and years and years. But there's not a whole lot of interaction with an actual teacher there. I mean, it's kind of these videos that she would look at, and she could do things pretty much at her own pace, but it's not that great. Okay, it's better than, going into class and getting sick, but it's not that great. Now, if the district were to go to 100% virtual schooling, mm-hmm. then they'd have the resources to be able to offer classes that are conducted by actual classroom teachers,
right,
who could meet with them online and video chat with them through Zoom or whatever, the kind of stuff that a lot of us did, that I did, in March and April and so forth. So it'd be a better quality of education. Okay, number one. And also, one of the justifications they give for trying to go to this sort of hybrid model where they have kids in school part of the day is because of the idea that face-to-face learning is better than virtual learning. And that's true.
Right.
That is 100% true. But what they forget, what they don't seem to be able to wrap their head around is we will not have your traditional face-to-face learning in the school buildings this year. It will be mask to mask. You'll be trying to communicate with kids in masks behind plexiglass barriers with an air of fear and menace throughout the building in short bursts of classes. This McKeesport plan would have them meet 20 minutes per class. You can't get anything done in 20 minutes.
Right.
So just from an academic standpoint, what I'm talking about, having virtual schooling 100% would be better. But it goes way beyond that, because if you open the school buildings, even for a hybrid model, even for part of the day, you're not just inviting the kids into the building, you're inviting the coronavirus in. If that virus is in your community, as it is in Allegheny County, pretty clearly, it is in Allegheny County. Our numbers are spiking. We have some of the highest numbers outside of Philadelphia.
Yep.
If it's in the community, it's going to get in the schools, and it won't be isolated in just a couple homes. Now it gets spread around the students and back to their homes, and then it's in the community much larger than it was before. So even if my daughter does the cyber option, and she never goes to in-person schooling, we have to leave the house at some point. I got to go get groceries, right? I got to get gas. Sometimes I might go outside to see the sun and go for a walk.
God forbid.
And now I am more likely to be exposed to the coronavirus because the schools have been opened. And what's worse, even if my district does make the right choice, and they're voting on Wednesday, and I hope they do make the right choice, even if they do decide to close the building. In Allegheny County, there's something like 42 school districts. So if the school district, a borough or a township down the road doesn't close, it's not like the virus is just going to stay over there.
Right.
So this is, we have to realize that, the virus affects the entire community. Only the entire community can fight it. You can't just, be a little safe over here and not so safe over there. It's going to get you.
Yeah, this reminds me so much. I could tell you we have versions of kind of what you said here in the Penridge School District, where parents, this is what really flipped me out this week. We were given a survey, right? And I have to say, first I want to give some kudos to the superintendent and the leadership of the different schools in the Pine Ridge School District, because I have to say, as a parent, I was very pleased with the kind of transparency that they showed, especially early on, basically saying we don't know for sure, and they've been having trouble. But now with the deadlines and pressure to reopen the schools, we were given a survey, right? We were waiting, then suddenly another survey comes out and say, well, what do you want, right? It's like, do you want full day in person? Or do you want like full day virtual, or do you want this hybrid model? And I have to say, I'll say up the thing is like the hybrid model that they were proposing wasn't that crazy to me. It was like you'd have Monday, everybody was virtual. And then you'd have a Tuesday, Thursday group, and then you'd have a Wednesday, Friday group, right? And then those would also be streamed for those students at home, right? So there would be they were privileging, say, like live synchronous, like, teaching. And my feeling on that was like, okay, if you have to go in that direction, that at the very least everyone's learning the tools, because eventually I think schools are going to shut down anyways. I mean, we're going to get to a point where it's going to explode and they get shut down. So at the very least, you've got the tools in those students' hands, especially ones that don't have the kind of support like at home that others might. So I said, okay, well, if we have to do that, maybe we could go there. But then we get the results of the survey back. And first of all, if you chose that hybrid model, that middle one, you were forced to choose a secondary choice. But if you chose one of the other ones, you didn't have to choose a secondary choice. Right. So they're already looking to kind of like, do something with the numbers. But what blew my mind is that what we get back and what's going before our school board tonight is a proposal to basically give everyone whatever they want. Right? And I'm like, as a teacher, I can't even imagine how I would do that. I mean, I teach higher ed, right? And our university is doing a very similar kind of nonsense, but and I can't, and I have my difficulties wrapping my head around how to do that. But in terms of like K through 12 schools, how you would actually construct a classroom, right, that would like meet everyone's possible needs, it's not possible. And so we're faced with these things, and we're supposed to feel empowered as parents. Right. But really what we're doing, we've kicked the ball down the road. And I also get this. It reminds me, and this is my long way around getting to this point, reminds me of stuff that you and I have talked about before, and you've written about before, is that, schools are always kind of like these focal points in our communities for larger social problems. Right. And then schools are somehow asked to be the place where they all get resolved. But I think schools, if this is my most generous reading on this, schools at this point are in almost a no-win situation because there is no funding, right? The classrooms are overcrowded, right? And again, this is not every school district, but by and large, right? The funding is not even there to support the kind of, full-on shift to, say, like sustainable, good pedagogically sound process of going all online. Right? Because there's no help from anywhere. So people are making these weird decisions about, well, our budget says we can't do this, so we can't do 6 foot distancing. We're only going to do 3. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like that kind of thing is like what we're experiencing right now is like it's all put down to like parents to make a decision because of the failings in our culture right now.
Yes, I think this virus has really shown us where all the cracks are in our society. All the things, we have let things get to such a point where we are on such a verge of collapse, and there's no escaping that knowledge now. It's out there. And like you said, the schools are really where, the rubber hits the road. We have because we have so little of the social safety net, and we require schools to do so much of it to meet, the needs of food, nutrition, healthcare, childcare, counseling, tutoring, socialization, self-esteem, special needs, protection from abuse. I mean, I could go on and on and on. All these issues that school, and that's not even really talking about education.
Right, exactly.
Right? We didn't even talk about education there. We didn't even get there. Exactly. all these different things. And it's one of the things, on the one hand, it's why I know I made the right decision to be a teacher, because I always knew I wanted to do something important, something that would matter. And what I do does every day. Every day, I know I have made a difference in that school, but I also know that I'm completely wiped out by the end of the day.
Right.
And with this coronavirus, it's almost like society is saying, okay, well, you have to put your life on the line. You have to work yourself to death and possibly your family's death, because help isn't going to come from anywhere else. One of the big things people say about this idea of going to virtual schooling is, well, if you do that, you aren't going to meet a lot of these other non-academic needs that kids have. And there is something to be said for that, because there are some needs that would be very difficult to meet with virtual learning, for example, childcare, right? But the answer to that isn't, okay, let's expose kids to, this virus that could kill them or you. That's not the answer. The answer is you actually have to look at the people who were supposed to solve the problem in the first place,
right,
and get them off their butt and get them to do their freaking jobs.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I can't, underline, highlight, notes with side. I swear to God. I mean, that is, I come down exactly in that space. And it's like, you've got to be kidding me. So like, or like, yeah, well, because of all these things, hey, let's just conduct a grand kind of biological and social experiment by throwing a bunch of kids into a meat grinder laboratory and see what happens. I mean, that's just freaking crazy. Well, listen, I want to talk a little bit. We're coming up on 7:30, where I want to kind of like talk a little bit about what some things that are happening in district, what kind of things you see as teachers that are doing, and so on. And I also let everybody know who's kind of tuning in, especially here on the Podbean app live, that you are welcome to call in. If you have a question, if you have a comment, you have thoughts, you want to share your experience and join the conversation, you can click right at the bottom of your screen, and I think it's going to require you to have a headset, just so everybody knows, and you can call in, and we'd love to hear from you too as well. If you have a question for Stephen or just a kind of overall comment to join the discussion, that'd be great. But we'll also remind you that you can help support this show and this podcast for as little as $5 a month by becoming a patron, by going to patreon.com/rcpress. You can choose your membership level starting at $5 a month, or if you're listening to this and you like what you're hearing, you can go right down to the bottom of the app. There's a little gift icon. You can click on that. You can send us a virtual cup of coffee or a love balloon or some roses or gold mic, whatever it might be. Podbean's got this little thing. They do golden beans, right? So if you have kids who play apps and things like this, or you play apps, and you go and you buy your little coins and you can purchase these things that help. Anything that you could kind of send us our way, we totally appreciate, and it kind of helps us kind of build out this podcast and build out this show and kind of expand the work that we're doing. So thanks. So call lines are open if anybody's interested. So while we're kind of get back into some of the specifics here. So look, get us on the ground in your discussions, or kind of looking at the community of teachers that are kind of pushing back here. They're looking for ways of kind of organizing, or at least kind of like trying to deal with these plans. What do you see kind of like the temperature on the ground among teachers? And I know that's, I'm asking you to kind of, I know teachers are not one solid block, right? So I know people are kind of over different angles, but at least for those teachers who are involved in the kind of activist community, they're interested in kind of like, pushing back against this corporatization of education and public education, or the privatization of education. Where do you see kind of like the teachers of some of the most promising work being done to teachers and pushing back against these plans?
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Just a little, no pressure, Stephen.
It's hard because, I mean, so much is, the coronavirus really puts, a marker on the timeline there. There's pre-coronavirus, and there's, who knows what the post-coronavirus world will be. You have some teachers that, God love them, they have this great positive attitude. Like, now that the coronavirus has shown us all these problems, we can actually go about fixing them. And we should talk about whenever the virus is done, how do we rebuild the school system to what it should be? And I think that's a wonderful discussion. But I guess I just can't it's like, we're drowning, the ship's going down, and you want to tell me how to build a gold-plated deck? I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I'm just not built that way,
Mm-hmm.
Though it's a good discussion to have. I think most teachers, at least in Pennsylvania that I know, we're terrified. We're really scared about what's happening. We're scared for ourselves. We're scared for our families. We're scared for our communities. We're scared for our students. We're scared for our jobs. We've never lived in such a world of uncertainty where so much is just, crazy. I keep thinking of like Franz Kafka, Nikolai Gogol.
Yeah.
Before I went to that school board meeting last week, and before I went, I made the mistake. I had like an hour to kill. So I went online and I said, you know what? Why don't I watch some old Monty Python sketches? That sounds like fun. I don't know why I did it. I don't know. And I was watching. I was like, oh my God, I'm living in a Monty Python sketch. Listening to these school board directors, it's like the Dead Parrot sketch. You know,
Yep.
Why can't you teach the kids if they're deathly ill? Because I'll be deathly ill too. Then we can cut taxes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm telling you, it is an era of dark humor. That is for sure.
That's all you got. That's all you got. So I hope that's not a cop-out answer. I think there are a lot of things that teachers have been pushing for a long time, for years and years and years, since the Obama administration, since the George W. Bush administration. And, there has been, I think before the coronavirus, I would say that we have made some headway in terms of standardized testing. It did seem like a lot of people were starting to realize that this high-stakes standardized testing was a mistake and that we needed to assess learning differently. When it comes to charter schools, it seemed like there's been so many scandals, and there have been scandals during this coronavirus pandemic, with charter schools double dipping and getting federal monies and so forth, that some people are starting to realize that charter schools can be really bad for our communities, and that they can exploit kids and they can take the money and run. Cyber schools, it's funny, cyber schools, especially cyber charter schools, up and before the coronavirus, it seemed like they were on their last legs.
Yep.
It seemed like everyone was saying, wow, these, it's pretty much shown that these schools are terrible and you get nothing out of them. And now I just read an article, I forget where, saying how, they're all stocked up. They got as many kids as they can possibly have,
Yep.
Because of what's happened, with the coronavirus. So that's probably going to be a huge boon to charter schools when it comes to ed tech, education technologies. I think before the coronavirus, the tide was starting to turn, and people were starting to realize that, some of these ed tech companies don't know what the heck they're doing, and they're just out to make money, and they're basically taking a lot of the bad pedagogy that you find on your standardized tests and your Common Core academic standards, and they're just, digitizing them. And now the coronavirus, it's boom time for the ed tech companies. So I think it's a little hard to tell where we'll be when this whole thing is over. Right now, I guess I'm more focused, and I think most people are more focused on surviving the pandemic, and then we'll see what we can do.
Well, it's interesting you say that about the ed tech stuff too. Is what I found most interesting is like, this, and we have the cyber charter stuff, kind of exactly as you're saying. In the state system of higher education where I work, there's been that constant push for distance learning, and there's very similar kind of echoes in terms of what you hear from K through 12. K-12 teachers to as well, is like, like the technology doesn't do anything, right? The technology is not, and if you're going to do this right, there's got to be kind of some significant infrastructure and significant support for that infrastructure in order to ensure things like equity, right? To make sure that, that you can deliver this in a way that's pedagogically sound. And it's not just about sitting a kid in front of a TV all day, right? And just kind of, hey, watch a bunch of videos. But what's been interesting to me to see, and seeing this firsthand with my own kids and the teachers over here in Penridge, is that when you marry ed tech with teachers in control, right, you get some really cool stuff, right? When teachers are driving the bus, so to speak, and they're actually given, say, hey, what can you do with these tools? Right. There were some really cool things that some of the teachers were doing for using, again, things like Flipgrid and things like, Google Docs and, really standard stuff, not like anything special bells and whistles stuff, but they were using it in such a way. And because what they were foregrounding, this is, at the elementary level, what they were foregrounding was the kind of connection and the relationships between the students and the teacher and each other. And using these kind of collaborative pedagogical, practices that they have in the classroom, and looking for ways to translate those things online. And again, it's not one-to-one. It's I'm not a huge fan of online. I will be teaching online in the fall, but I don't like it. So I'm not like one of those say, hey, let's all do this. But it was, it's a different kind of conversation. And it reminded me of the same kind of conversation that was happening at the beginning of charter schools. When charter schools, initially, you had kind of the AFT got behind charter schools early on, when it was saying, hey, these are kind of like these laboratories where you can try out different kind of innovative pedagogical tools and then share them with everybody, right? And that quickly, that lasted a blink and a night, and then that was quickly, the road to privatization. But that idea that, hey, if we are not kind of like just hampered down by the state standards that are forced down on us and kind of pushed down, you have to teach to the test. But now we're opening up to see how can you make this work? The creativity of those teachers, and like in my mind, it's like in some of the worst possible conditions, right? Was amazing. And so, that's when my optimistic moments, which are not many, but in my optimistic moments, that's where I go. I start thinking about, look, we have a little window into this moment where we can see what happens when we put teachers back in the driver's seat, as opposed to, whatever, say a board of governors or a school board or kind of like right-wing legislators who just want to turn everything into a number. So I guess that's where I go to my happy place. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right about the creativity of teachers. I've seen some amazing things the teachers did, even in March and April and May. And for myself, I feel the same way about teaching online. I mean, I don't like it either, but I thought it was the only way to go, and I think it's the only way to go now. Yeah. And whenever we went to it in March, there was a part of me that was a little excited. What? This is something different. I wonder, what can I do with this? I remember a couple years ago, I had a class of students. I guess they were a little nerdier as a whole than my normal students, and they loved the video game Breath of the Wild, Legend of Zelda, right, for the Switch. And I had a Switch at home, but I hadn't really touched it, that much. It was there for my daughter pretty much. So, I got the game and I started to play it, and, my students and I would talk about it, and I would ask them for help. I'd be like, hey, where do you get these hot peppers? Because I can't survive on the mountain without the hot peppers. They're like, well, you got to go here and you got to, so it was really nice, with the kids and everything. And playing through the game, which was awesome, by the way, I thought about it in terms of education and ed tech, and what is the game teaching me, and how can the mechanics of a game like this be used to teach? Because Zelda Breath of the Wild is worlds away from any ed tech I have ever seen. Yeah. I mean, it is not, So I thought about it, and I mean, I think there's certain every ed tech is a tool, and it can be used a lot of different ways. It's just we don't, in general, I don't think the people who make it are that concerned about the students, because the students aren't the consumer.
Right.
The consumer is the administrators, right? The consumer is the school board. The consumer are the people who, count the beans and want to say, we have these kind of test scores and so forth. And I think that's the problem. But teachers, I think when they look at this, they're looking at how is this going to affect the students. So it's a very different way of looking at things.
Yeah, I think it couldn't be said better. I mean, who is the consumer? And I remember there was a time when we were brought to Harrisburg to, look, I mean, it was pretty clear what was happening, is like they wanted to get, approval for, these like cut scores is basically really what they wanted, even though they dressed it up in all these really nice things. Like, what are the cut scores that we're going to allow students to enter the university on, right? And, I teach writing, right? So I teach, writing, and there's a long history of people trying to turn the first year writing class into kind of like a number crunching kind of like, revenue stream, right? So we kind of knew that kind of going in. And this one guy who was from IUP, who was one of, happened to be one of these, kind of fairly decent names in the field of composition and rhetoric that did assessment stuff, and he was our kind of point person. And we had to do all this reporting back and talking about what we thought about the different approaches to this. And these statewide administrators who kept on telling us about the research, we kept on kind of looking at them like, what the hell are they talking about, right? And we have this like leading like researcher in the field of assessment saying that's not what the research shows, and quoting all this stuff. And they were just kind of like talking past each other in many ways, right? Because here's the research, because it turns out we're reading very different research, right? If you read the kind of the research that administrators are reading, right, it's kind of like it's become more and more kind of connected with these kind of like, consumer technological solutions of things, right? So they were reading research that was, if you dig a little deeper, you see that they're quoting like studies by ed tech companies and places like this, right? Because they're the target audience of they're the consumers, exactly as you said. And it just flips everything in this kind of like, upside down world. And it makes, well, let me kind of switch it in like this. This makes me super concerned, Stephen. I mean, when there's part of me, when I wanted you to have you on the show, it's like there's part of me is hoping that we could end this conversation and I would feel a little better about what's going to happen in the fall, right? But I also know I'm not a fool, right? I'm not a fool. I know your work. I know where I come down, and I know that there's not a whole lot of places where we can, or direction, I don't know, we'll say places, a whole lot of places that we can actually start feeling good about these decisions that are being made. And I don't know about you, but I mean, I'm really concerned. And I don't know what you even say to parents or teachers or people just trying to kind of make a good decision in this moment. I mean, have you had the opportunity to talk to other parents and things like this about this too, and some of the concerns? I'm curious where you see others in your community thinking about this stuff.
Well, I mean, in terms of something positive, because I mean, yeah, I can certainly get bogged down in the negative too, but there actually is something positive we can take out of this whole coronavirus thing. If we look back to March, whenever this all started, I have never in my entire life seen government work so quickly and do things that you would never think possible. Whenever we started to close the schools, I wrote an article saying, hey, we got to stop the standardized tests because it's standardized test season. We got to get rid of them because there's no way we're going to be able to do this otherwise. And it was a week later, and I'm not saying it was me who did it, but it was literally a week later that Betsy DeVos was agreeing with me.
Yep. You're like,
right?
wait, what's wrong here?
we canceled, high-stakes standardized testing in a matter of about a week nationwide. That is amazing to me. We made the kind of changes at split-second changes to pedagogy, to what we were doing in the classroom. Teachers were getting out there and making entirely new curriculum out of nowhere, and everyone was coming together, and things were moving. It just shows that we can change. We can fix these problems if we really want to. So I think that's the positive. The positive is this dysfunction that we have come to accept as normal is not normal, and we don't have to accept it. So that is something positive to take from this. In terms of, what have parents told me? I mean, most parents I've talked to are scared. Mm-hmm. They're very scared about what's going to happen. What's going to happen with their kids, and those who have been who pretty much opposed the idea of virtual schooling that I've been pushing forward right now have kind of been like two camps. On the one side, there are people who probably any other day of the week I would agree with 100%. Who say, this ed tech stuff's terrible. Online schooling is terrible. That's why we can't do it, because if we do it now, it'll never go away. And I see where they're coming from, but you have to get to later before you can deal with later's problems. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there are some who are like that. And there are others who see all the different things that they need from schools, like childcare, and like meeting the needs of special needs students and so forth, that don't want to do virtual schooling because they're afraid of how it will impact their individual child. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's kind of what I'm seeing from parents. Though a lot of parents I've talked to, are in favor of the virtual schooling, in favor of doing whatever they can to protect the health of their kids and their teachers. I think that's something we haven't really talked about. Right. It's super important that, parents get a choice in most districts whether their kids get to do virtual schooling or go in person. Teachers, they don't have a choice. Their choice is, you either work here or you don't.
Right.
And it just kills me that so few people seem willing to stand up for educators and say, I've had so many great educators in my life. I would not be the person I am today without my teachers, and my kids wouldn't be the person they are. They're going to become without their teachers. We need to look out for them too.
Right. Right. I mean, awesome point. And I would even add into that too as well, when you're talking about all the other people that are worked within the school district, the clerical staff, the custodial staff, right? Many of which have also been pressed. I know that I've talked to some folks at some schools who are talking, say, look, they've been cutting their custodial staff and they're not rehiring custodial staff, and so now you've got like fewer people trying to kind of like bust their butts in order to keep everything clean without proper PPE, for example, in some cases. That you're thinking about that school as a system as part of that community is absolutely. I mean, teachers are very much we've been talking about how important it is to respect and see as heroes the frontline workers. They're like, well, we're talking about frontline workers. We're talking about teachers right now. We're talking about those clerical staff. We're talking about the custodial workers in those schools. We're talking about the bus drivers and the bus aides. We're talking about like the whole realm of people that are going to be in contact that will be under significant risk as we kind of move forward. And and I think that here's this goes back to something that we started with tonight. You said this whole idea about being operating in this fact-based reality for so long, in where you're trying to look at the best possible information and then thinking about creative solutions based upon what is going to be best for the most, right? And then think about around the edges. And one of the things that, there was this blip of this conversation, and I was actually foolishly hopeful that this is the direction that the discussions were going to go around some of this hybrid, these hybrid things. Because I also think that the word hybrid schooling is doing a hell of a lot of work, right? In different schools. Like, in other words, the hybrid is the thing that they're saying that is going to try to kind of be the alternative that's not really workable, right? It's like some people are hybrid in the way that I understand it. You do, part online, part in school, you break this up. But in other cases, it's kind of like, oh, you can do some of this or choose to do what you want. And they're teaching, it's weird. But when it comes down to, like, say, for example, the case of special needs kids, I mean, my sister is mentally handicapped. I grew up in kind of like with her. She had a severe reaction to the MMR vaccination. We happen to be like one of those, like, literally we have documents showing this, like 1 in a million that have an allergy to this particular thing in the old shot, not the new ones, but the old stuff, right? And then so she got brain damage as a result of that. So I kind of grew up in that kind of environment and know full well both the strain on kind of, say, on my parents, right? My parents' marriage broke up in part because of that, right? But the strain that it took on, say, on my mom and needing help, right? And so, but in my mind, it's like, okay, if we have most of the kids, say, for example, in high schools, who seem to be like broader carriers and kind of more at risk, they all do online, right? Then you can actually open up these other spaces like for those like special needs kids, right? I mean, there would be ways of doing things like that, right? And I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but I'm saying it's like, look, if there's special cases, there's ways that we could handle special cases. And it seems like a weird move to say, well, because we have these special needs kids, therefore everybody has to go back. It seems to me that actually puts those special needs kids in more risk, right?
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, the kids who have the highest needs that can't be met virtually, I think it would be, completely fair to have them come into the building to some degree and, to get a little bit of extra help. I completely agree with that. I think the problem is that, like in my classes, for example, about anywhere between a third and a half of the students in my class have special needs. And those are just the ones that are identified.
Yeah.
And the problem is we have, when there's no social safety net, whenever, it's hard to get, the proper nutrition when someone's living in poverty and they're pregnant, whenever you have all these societal problems, it translates to more kids with special needs. So, yeah, I mean, I would agree that those with the highest needs, we should definitely do that. I 100% agree. But that's probably not going to mean every student with special needs, can do that.
100%. We got about, say, 5 minutes or so back. So if anybody out there has got a burning question or kind of concern, you want to join the conversation, please feel free to do before we wrap up today's show. So, I feel in a weird place, I guess, right? Even kind of closing out tonight, in part because it seems like we're on a train and the train, and it's not one train, like we're certainly not all in this together. I mean, there's some school districts that are going all online. There's some school districts that are going kind of all in. The head of the Penridge School Board, her name is Joan M. Cullen. If you actually want to check out her kind of white nationalist tweets, you can at Joni Baloney 90. That's Joni, Joanie Baloney 90. She's come under major fire for, she's a big Trumper. She put tweets out last week that basically, said how she instructed her son that you don't need to wear a mask if you don't have symptoms, right? All this, and she's posting this stuff out as a school board, the head of the school board, which is why there's also a petition that is circulating to kind of remove her. In part because of this, you have like in my school district, when you have, even when you have school administrators who were trying to come up with some workable solutions, I'm not fully happy with what they did. But now it has to go to the school board that is being run by, kind of some zealots who are kind of anti-maskers, pro-pandemic, it's like, so that's like my school district. And then you've got, Wissahickon School District, for example, where my neighbor teaches. that school district, they had a plan that was basically going to be in the high school. I think it was a high school and junior high or middle school was going to all be online. They took that to the school board, and the school board said, nope, you're all going back. Right? And so, I mean, and there was my favorite story about that, again, go back to our kind of dark world and dark comedy again. But my favorite story about that is him telling me about that school board meeting was that, one of the school board members said, like, why am I making this decision? I'm a real estate agent. Why do I have to make the decision about what to go back? Right. And he's sitting there saying, like, you're just making every point I've been making for the past 20 years of my life, right? It's like, yeah, why is a real estate agent making a decision about like the health of my kids in schools and curricular matters? Great thing. But I mean, if where do you see yourself now, kind of going forward? I mean, is it just going to be the suck is coming? And the anxiety is just going to be there, and there's not really a way out at this point.
Well, I mean, time slows for no one, right? I mean, like you said about being on that train, that runaway train, it's coming to the station. There's not much we can do. It's going to get there. I mean, some districts are trying to push back the start date, which is probably a good idea. But I mean, eventually it's going to get there, and we have to deal with it. We will, in some way or another. I think worst case scenario is that there will be districts that do this kind of hybrid plan or these in-person plans that will quickly explode in their faces with people getting sick, and they'll have to go to virtual, right? I mean, the funny thing is, whenever I hear administrators talk about this, I've not heard one administrator admit that these hybrid plans are sustainable, that this is going to work and we're going to keep this way, for the school year. None of them say that. They all kind of admit, yeah, well, it's very possible that, someone's going to get sick and we're going to have to go to virtual at some point in the year, which, is a red flag for me. But I think that's going to happen in a lot of places. And I wonder what the fallout is going to be. If we can get through this, if we can somehow get through this pandemic, are people going to remember what people did? Are they going to remember that Joe Blow, school board member, voted to keep the building open during the pandemic? Are they going to remember that, Dr. So-and-so, superintendent of schools with all this education and experience, made the decision to keep the schools open with all this information against it? I kind of hope that some people have their reputations completely destroyed by some of the terrible decisions they're making today. And to be fair, I agree with you. I mean, in a lot of cases, it's not fair to have school board members making these decisions, real estate agents, and someone who operates a mom and pop store, and on Main Street. It's not fair. This is not something they should be doing. But unfortunately, that's what we're down to. And it's put up or shut up time. Right. So unfortunately, there's probably going to be people getting sick. There are probably going to be people who die. There are probably going to be people who have lifelong debilitating illnesses based on having and surviving the coronavirus. And what the long-term impact of that will be is very hard to tell.
Yeah. Indeed. I mean, and I have to say that I am a huge fan of saying that for activists, right, and for teachers, right, and for community members, that it is on us to make sure that nobody forgets their faces or their names. One of the things that, this is one of the things that I said at my university, at Kutztown University, where President Kenneth Hawkinson, this is what he said on his when he announced our back to school plans. This is what he said.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
I'm sorry, that was from Shrek. I hit the wrong button. That was King Farquaad, but it was it was basically that. Okay, he doubled down on going back, and he had the gall to use the kind of like, you know, the story, the grit and fortitude of the parents of coal miners and mill workers and things that our students come from as our obligation to go back. And you know, my first response, I was so livid when he came out with that. I said, I want everybody to, I sent out the video to everybody I could send it out to all throughout social media and said, I want everybody to remember this man. Because this man is the reason that there'll be hospitalizations and death and sickness. And I think that this is even more so the case when it comes to our local school boards who are making this decision right now. And if you're in a situation where you have a school board meeting that is coming up soon, the decision has not yet been made in your district, this is the kind of thing that I think that every, say, parent, concerned citizen and activist should be saying to those people at those meetings, is that we are going to remember you. All right, when the first sickness comes, when the pandemic hits, when people die, this is on you. But I tend to go to that place very often. Yeah. Well, Stephen, like I want to give everyone a plug to your book too. Once again, it's like, you know, Stephen's book is Gadfly on the Wall. Public school teacher speaks out on racism reform. Matter of fact, there was a couple years back when right after this book came out, this was kind of one of our membership giveaways books. So I bought a bunch of them up and gave it out to new members at that point because it's so excellent. And it's been, you know, and really your blog, you know, Gadfly on the Wall blog has really been one of my go-to places. Is really, you know, feeling the I guess that kind of like the outrage that is so grounded in the community and what you're doing, and that feels so good to me. And the attention to what is, you know, the detail of the struggles that is happening, that giving resources to, you know, parents, to students, to teachers, to activists all over the state. So I really appreciate all your work, man.
Thank you very much. That's very kind.
Yeah, well, it's very true. Let me tell you. Well, I'd like to. Do you have any kind of, say, closing remarks or things, that message you'd want to go out to folks that are kind of listening here or going to listening up on our podcast before we head out for the evening?
I guess if I was going to give any closing remarks, it would probably be just to remember this is not normal. This is not okay. That, you know, if we all come together, if we work as a community, if we work for each other, if we love each other, if we care about each other, we can get through this and there can be a better day.
Man, I can't think of a better place to kind of end it on this night. So with that, Stephen Singer, thank you so much again for kind of joining us here in the Out to Coop Live. I'd like to thank everybody who joined us there tonight. I want to remind you that you can help support this show, become a patron for as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress. Or before you go tonight, you can go right down to the bottom of your app and click that little gift icon and send us a little gift. Get up those kind of golden beans, as Podbean calls them. You can send us a little cup of coffee, a balloon, some roses, a golden mic, whatever it might be. You can even send like a yacht or something, or an island for those folks who really want to, you know, dig deep in their millionaire pockets, because I know that's who's out listening, right? You know, hardly. But no, literally anything that you can throw our way really helps support the show and expand what we're doing. And I think it's going to be critical now more than ever that not only are we kind of an election cycle, but we're also in the middle of a pandemic. And then all of us, as Stephen was saying, is like, you know, we need to find these spaces where we can find spaces for support, spaces of solidarity, and spaces where we can begin kind of strategizing about where to go next. So I want to remind everybody, one last show note, that this Friday we will not have a regular Out to Coop podcast show. I'm going to be away for that show, so we'll if I have the chance, I'm going to throw in an archive show for there, but it might be that we might just pick up next Monday. And next Monday on Out to Coop Live, we just may have kind of a couple teachers from down in Philadelphia who are doing some activist work on this kind of back to school stuff, and we'll see if we can arrange that if that date's going to work. If not, we might get some folks back in higher ed, or some folks in Lehigh Valley that are doing some really awesome work when it comes to police brutality and the pushback and the struggle for Black lives. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate you tuning in tonight. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken Press. Special shout out once again to Jonathan Mann, who gives our intro and outro music. And thanks all to you who supported this show, who support Raging Chicken over the years. Stay safe. And as Steven said, love each other. We're in it. See